Those are really big questions. I'm kind of just focusing on building a family on my
You
own.
mean you're not planning to be prime minister tomorrow? No?
Not tomorrow, not ever, but definitely not tomorrow. So for me, I still struggle with the eligibility criteria in Ontario. The funding, as you both know, is tracked through the person getting pregnant. And so that means that my wife, Baden, wasn't even able to access her own funded IVF cycle because we knew on the outset that we needed a surrogate to build our family. We have to then find the surrogate before creating the embryos. So if I could wave my magic wand and I could be premier, I would say the funding tracked to the people desiring the family as opposed to the people getting pregnant.
Welcome to My Fertility Podcast, Superhumans, the show that brings you expert insights, personal stories, and the latest in fertility care all in one place.
Whether you're starting your fertility journey, navigating challenges, or just exploring your options, we're here to empower you with knowledge, support, and hope.
Join us as we dive deep into topics that matter most, from IVF and fertility treatments to mental health and wellness.
I'm Dr. Mavis Garcia.
And I'm Dr. Wise. We're two of the fertility specialists at Markham Fertility Centre in Markham, Ontario, Canada. Think of us as your sisters in all things fertility. Let's demystify the world of fertility together. On today's episode of My Fertility Podcast, we are joined by Zane. He is a keen relationship builder, and he lives and breathes political outreach and fertility advocacy. Having spent years working at Queen's Park, he now works in government relations, consulting for one of Canada's premier boutique firms. Together with his wife, they launched the blog Not My Tummy, But I'm Still Mummy in 2021 to chronicle their journey building a family with the help of a gestational surrogate. Their daughter, Scottie, was born in July of 2023, and they are now in the midst of a sibling journey. For his work in advocating for equitable parent leave and ensuring Canada's latest time to attach legislation included parents by surrogacy, Zane was named Fertility Matters Canada's 2003 Changemaker of the Year. Zane is the proud board member of Conceivable Dreams. This is Ontario's fertility patient advocacy organization and was the champion behind Ontario's announcement to triple the funding for their fertility program and introduce a $5,000 fertility tax credit. Zane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Welcome, Zane. We're excited to talk to you today. So we're going to start by hearing about your fertility journey. Tell us a bit about yourself and what led to this moment on a Tuesday afternoon in 2025, talking to us about all things fertility.
It's been a long time coming and it's a long journey, but I'm really glad to be here. It started, I guess, for my wife, it started when she was a teenager. She has epilepsy. And when she was first diagnosed, her neurologist said that she's never really going to be seizure free. She's never going to live alone or graduate university or drive a car or have a family or scuba dive. And kind of talked through her to her parents directly. And she tells the story that that was just really traumatizing for her, that they wouldn't really acknowledge her as a person because her seizures weren't stable. And fast forward a number of years later, she was able to find a drug that would stabilize seizures and was able to do all the things that the doctor said that she wouldn't be able to do. We got together in university. We met at Carleton University. We were running against each other for a board of governors position, a student election. And you'll see that politics is a theme that's going to come up quite a bit. The student government was just the start. And we've been together for 13 years. And before we got engaged, probably around 2016, we had a serious conversation as to what would a family look like for us. And she reminded me that the medication she's on isn't pregnancy safe. She takes valproic acid to control her seizures, which is, I mean, you guys would know better than me, but a class X drug by the FDA and really not recommended as safe for pregnancy. We tried to switch medication to a different medication that would control seizures, and the results were disastrous. They were just causing seizures, impacting our relationship, impacting her mental health. And after switching to the first one, she said, I got to go back on what is most familiar to me. that I know that my body responds to well, and will make decisions about family planning afterwards. But my health comes first. And I said, you're absolutely right. So it was there and then that we decided that our family building journey would be a little bit different. The medication makes for an inhospitable environment for growing an embryo, so a significant risk of birth defects, but has no impact on egg and sperm health. So for us, that meant gestational surrogacy was the path for us, with me obviously as the sperm contributor, and my wife as the egg, and just having to find a gestational surrogate to help carry our family. We later got engaged, got married, and then we had the challenge of navigating the Ontario healthcare system and the clinic system to try to find the right clinic for us, to try to find a surrogate and build our family in that way. We started working with an agency originally. The agency ended up actually going bankrupt in the middle of our journey. And we realized during the journey and in talking to a lawyer that since you can't pay an agency to match you in Canada, and you certainly can't pay a surrogate in Canada, you're really paying for kind of that concierge service, the white glove service of helping navigate the journey. But you really do have to grab the bull by the horns and try to find a surrogate yourself. There's no one else who's a better knower of you than you, and you're the best representative for yourself. So we decided to make our journey public online. It started with a blog and an Instagram account to direct the blog to navigate the patient's experience discussing gestational surrogacy in Canada. And it had the byproduct of putting ourselves out there such that a surrogate would hopefully find us. We had a couple of Instagram reels that went viral, hundreds of thousands of views. And with that, surrogate reached out to us. She was from Tillsonburg, Ontario, about an hour and a half away from us. Wonderful woman with a wonderful family who had never really thought about being a surrogate before seeing our posts, but was motivated just by the nature of my wife and I and our dog and the family, the parents that she thought that we would be. And it reminded her of herself and her husband as well. And did IVF. And, fast forward a little bit longer than that. And we do have a daughter, Scottie, a year and a half old now. And we're talking about journey number 2. Unfortunately, it won't be with the same surrogate. She let us know that there's stuff going on in her life that she isn't able to do a sibling journey anymore. And so we're on the market trying to find a new surrogate and to make more embryos and completing our family.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
And then, of course, I didn't really talk about, my own interest in this. I have a background in politics and government. And when we were navigating the Ontario system, we noticed some of the challenges that patients face. And it motivated her and I to enact change in our own way. So I got involved with Conceivable Dreams, which is Ontario's patient advocacy organization, in an effort to lobby the government to, originally it was change the rules, the eligibility criteria for the Ontario funding, the Ontario Fertility Program. But what it since evolved to expanding the program and bringing in a tax credit for so many of the other costs that go into family building in addition to that first funded cycle. And that helps with costs for testing, costs for drugs, hopefully costs for legal agreements for surrogacy as well, hopefully costs for preventative egg freezing for those that need it too. Because as we know, there's so much more that goes into a fertility journey than just the one funded cycle that's offered.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, I think for our listeners, I would say I had the pleasure of working with Zane in Conceivable Dreams. So I am quite familiar with his leadership skills and his organization skills and his advocacy skills, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to have you in the podcast to talk more about that. Before we get into that, I do have one burning question. Who won that?
I wanted to ask the same thing.
Did you or your wife win the election or the running for the position?
Yeah, in university.
Yeah. So I won on the votes. I'd like to think that we both won because we ended up with each other.
That's right.
But she sometimes says, and I might be letting out a bit of a secret here, she says, well, her real motivation for running was just to be invited to all the fancy receptions and things. So she still got to go as a +1 because we got together shortly thereafter and she was my date to a lot of that stuff.
Well, Well, I think a very important life lesson here, right? Even though you don't necessarily get the goal that you want, you can still get to where you want to be in a slightly different way. And
Exactly.
if that is not a life lesson for fertility as well, I don't know
Right.
what is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah. But so, both of you are obviously very familiar with Conceivable Dreams, but can you tell us a bit more about this organization and who is Conceivable Dreams? What
Yeah,
are their goals, what they're working on towards at this point?
for sure. It's a grassroots patient advocacy organization, was founded well before the funding came out in 2015, probably around 2008 or 2009, with the goal of getting it included in OHIP funding more broadly. Because at the
So it's like an
time,
Ontario-based organization.
Ontario-based
Yeah.
patient advocacy organization. So
Mhm.
they were the original grassroots lobbying advocacy group for that funding that came out in 2015, that original tranche of funding, then kept that steady drumbeat to make sure that clinics remained open all through COVID when all of those lockdowns were going on. So many patients reached out to Conceivable Dreams to help advocate for this because, fertility clinics were often overlooked and were a bit of an afterthought in terms of the regular healthcare system more broadly. But these are necessary treatments that needed to be taking place, and people couldn't stay home in the middle of a cycle or give up on a cycle because it was so expensive while COVID lockdowns were taking place. After COVID kind of subsided, we did a bit of a deep dive to say, and this is kind of where I got involved, what can we do for patients? And we took two tracks. Could we advocate for changes to the Ontario fertility program or something else? And what we decided was the Ontario fertility program is a relationship between governments and clinics. And we don't really want to step on clinics' toes by saying X, Y, and Z should be changed within it. If there should be changes, it should be something that the clinics are advocating for. But we wanted something that put money directly back in the pockets of patients. And that was a direct relationship between patients and government. And so we lobbied for this tax credit, as I mentioned, because so many other costs go into fertility. And this is something that the government can say, we're doing this specifically for patients and we're helping fertility patients, we're helping folks build their families. So they made that announcement actually coupled with the expansion of the funding to have more cycles available at more clinics for more people to lower wait times and improve access. And so we were part of that announcement of those two pieces together back in October. So we've accomplished a ton in the past almost 15 years that we've been around, and it's been an incredible journey for me to chair it in the last few years. And as for what's next, we want to help improve the patient experience at clinics. So often patients are overwhelmed, feel a bit like a number, and want, a bit more of a personal touch. And so we're looking into ways that we can help improve patient experience and let clinics know that this is not just a general going to a doctor's office. There's an ethical element, there's a financial element, there's a social element in family building and reproductive care that goes beyond regular medicine and regular doctor's visits. And so if we can help to develop a toolkit or some sort of materials to help doctors be better informed, to help clinics be more mindful of patient care and patient advocacy, and likewise for patients to make sure they're asking the right questions of their doctors to be as best informed about this space as they possibly can, then I think we've done a job well done. So more on that in the coming year, but that's kind of setting our sights on what's next for us.
That is definitely quite a lot that Conceivable Dreams has accomplished. It's really quite an incredible feat for sure. How do you balance everything? How do you find the time?
I'm just really motivated by building community. We do this all off the side of our desks. We do this all as unpaid volunteers. So it's about finding the right team, the best team around with the best physician advisors or clinical advisors like Dr. Garcia to help us out and keep us on the straight and narrow. But I've just noticed so many problems in this space. And I think as an advocate, as someone with a background in government and politics and having used to work at Queen's Park, I was poised to to know this space really well and know that I had friends who were these decision makers in some of these political offices. And so for me,
Mhm.
it was easy as a couple of phone calls and I know that that can often be the most effective when for others, they might reach out to their MPPs, or write letters or do interviews, and all is helpful. Grassroots advocacy is the way to get things done, but sometimes an inside track helps to move things along a little bit better. And I'm fortunate that I had the right relationships at the right time. And the government was really, really willing and motivated to help. And there was the right people in government to say that this is something that we need to be doing for families in Ontario. And it didn't fall on deaf ears. It was great to see advocacy
Mhm.
actually work.
I have to say, coming from a communist country, I have to be honest, I'm not used to talking to government and being in Conceivable Dreams, being present at Queen's Park, meeting with MPPs, meeting with the Minister of Health, even though I've been living in Canada for well over 20 years, just having been raised in a communist country where government is just not accessible to you. As a matter of fact, if you even breathe funny that put you in jail, it was such an experience for me to be like, wow, the people that I elect are actually here for me and they actually have to listen to me. That's like their job. I mean, aside from the fact that it was an amazing win for patients in Ontario, and I was so pleased to be part of Conceivable Dreams during that time, on a personal level, it was really incredible for me to know that that's what democracy actually is like.
Yeah, I take it for granted. Thank you for reminding me that this isn't the way it is everywhere in the world. And you're absolutely right.
One of the things that I love about Conceivable Dream is that a lot of the board members are actually patients that have their own fertility journeys. Some of them have not been successful, and they really are just very motivated by giving back and saying, my experience wasn't great, either from the clinic perspective or the societal perspective, government perspective. And I think that we can do better for others. And that's one of the reasons I got involved is because one of my patients was part of Conceivable Dreams, and she told me about the organization and what it does. So for anybody out there who's listening, I know that Conceivable Dreams already fill all the board positions, but how often are new positions open for the board in Conceivable Dreams, you think?
I hope with this new round of board members that people will stick around for a while. I think it's based on vacancy, and I
Mm,
hope that people will give this a couple of years of their time to really show the commitment. But it's a grassroots organization, and we're always looking for volunteers. We're
mm,
always looking for people, not just to put up the hand and say, give me something to do, I'll do it, but say, this is a problem that I'm facing and I have the solution to fix it, or I want to be part of the solution to fix it. I just need a bit of, background resources or some muscle strength or a team of other advocates to help me move this along. We're a scrappy bunch and we're motivated by change and we're motivated by solving our own problems, not problems that we create, of course, but solving problems that we face.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
and so that's the kind of folks that we're looking for. If you're interested in volunteering, don't say, I mean, it's always helpful to say, put me in, coach, but it's even better to say, I need your help for X because this is the problem that I'm facing and this is how we could solve it together. Because in that case, there's always going to be folks that are able to help because we're all looking for a bit of direction ourselves. I
Mhm.
always feel like I'm in over my head, but yet I've been doing this for a number of times, but that's just imposter syndrome, I guess.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, stepping away a little bit from your role in Conceivable Dreams, I want to go back to your surrogacy journey. If there was someone, let's say a friend, to ask you out for coffee and says, saying, I need some advice facing a surrogacy journey, and I have the option of doing it on my own, i.e., going on social media and telling my story, versus going through an agency, what advice do you give? What do you think are the pros and cons? Like, is there a type of patient or a type of journey that would be more appropriate for one versus the other?
I think that agencies certainly have their place, but it's important to know just a couple of rules that by law, you can't pay them to find you a surrogate. They're not a matchmaking service. They can't force two people together without consent. They're not regulated in Canada. They're all private businesses, and that you are your best advocate. You are your best storyteller. And For me, I say the bed is already getting quite full between the doctor and the lawyer and your spouse and you and the surrogate. And it's even weirder to have a different party to try to be a buffer. There are a lot of benefits, though. I think for folks that are from outside of Canada that are looking to Canada for surrogacy or to help build their family through third party reproductive care, agencies are able to help schedule appointments, are able to help with travel, are able to help with second language issues, and be a bit of a conduit for intended parents that are located outside of Canada. And I think that it helps when meeting a surrogate who otherwise would have a bit more of a language barrier between them and the intended parents. But I think for most Canadians who are seeking surrogacy to build their family, who understand the Canadian healthcare system, who already have their embryos ready and are just looking to an agency for the sake of finding a surrogate, give it a try on your own first. You'd be surprised. And if your surrogate is looking for community, there's avenues for that as well, whether it's getting counseling and mental health support or the online Facebook groups or support groups through clinics in many cases. I think surrogacy agencies often are there to try to build community among surrogates, and the resources are free, whether they're with an agency or not, that they're able to be that resource for surrogates that are looking for support.
And when you put your journey out there on social media, how did your family react? How did your friends react? Do you have any feedback for patients who are considering to do that? Things to watch out for?
Yeah, it's daunting to put yourself out there online, and it's daunting to try to be your most authentic self when they're only seeing a snapshot. I recall a time where my wife captured a video of herself in a moment of vulnerability after a retrieval and wanted to be a bit of a photojournalist and document it, and found herself being vulnerable, crying in front of the camera. And my mom reached out and said, "Why would you cry in front of the camera? Like, just show your best. Or if you're not, then are you doing this just for the clicks?" And it's not about that. It's about telling the whole story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And vulnerability helps to show you as a person and not just a social media influencer. Obviously, Instagram shows people's best sides online. So you want to try to show as much of your authentic self as possible. And it's not easy. There are days where I don't want to dance on TikTok. And if you don't want to dance on TikTok and you don't think that that's your authentic self, then don't do it. Like, don't fake it to try to find a surrogate. We have friends in this space that have never shown their faces online and still were able to find a surrogate on Instagram, whether they're doing the back of their heads or whether they're doing graphic images or comics, basically, of their lives and posting little images or videos like that. There's different ways to tell your story that's most authentically you than dancing on TikTok, but you're not trying to find any old person. You're trying to find the right person. I'm a very big believer in kismet. And so you're looking for that person who's meant to be. And whether it takes 1 month or 6 months or a couple years, everyone has that person out there. And it's just about hitting send at the right time to make that post to find that special match.
You mentioned a really interesting point around social media. I mean, I think social media is still relatively new, and there's such a wide variety of attitudes towards social media, what you quote unquote should be sharing on social media, what you shouldn't be sharing on social media. And it's also generational too. It's an overgeneralization for sure, but I would sort of say, younger generations are more used to it, to the sharing on social media. But older generations, our parent generation, to them, it's still quite foreign. Again, generalization, not for everyone. But it can be really hard when you're putting yourself out there personally and talking about something like this, and then now opening yourself up to everybody's opinions and attitudes, not just about the journey, but around sort of how you're using social media, which can be really challenging. And you're right. I think you make a really good point that, the dancing on TikTok, it's not necessarily for everyone, and that's okay.
But keep in mind, those same people who say that social media is new and is a little bit foreign are saying the same thing about IVF, right? Like
Mhm.
that's
True.
that, right? They're coming into their adolescence at around the same time. And my grandmother reminds me that she's seen from the 70s when they were test tube babies, and when even before that, where people were just barren because they weren't having children, right? And we get to, she's holding her great grandchild in her arms and saying, like, the science is wild that we've gone this far. And so this is just as new as Instagram is.
You're absolutely right. And so, in general, when it comes to surrogacy, a lot of people can also have a lot of opinions around that or feelings around that. Have you dealt with or have you seen particular policies, societal attitudes that you feel maybe could use a little bit of editing, a little bit of change when it comes to supporting families who are pursuing surrogacy or thinking about surrogacy?
So, yeah, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that we did on our own to try to move the needle on that piece. We realized that Canada's parental leave policies, for example, were not inclusive of families through adoption and surrogacy. And so we had to lobby, my wife and I had to lobby to make a change at the federal level to have those policies changed and inclusive of people who are building their family through third-party reproduction, whether it's adoption or surrogacy. Right now, there's two buckets for parental leave: a maternity leave bucket going to a birth giver and parental leave bucket going to the parents in aggregate. Of course, if you're adopting a child, then you wouldn't get the maternity leave bucket. And if you're having a child through surrogacy, then the surrogate gets that maternity leave bucket. And so that means that we were clawed back 15 weeks less on parental leave than other families would otherwise be. So we were able to not only effectively lobby for that change to have the funding changed federally, though they haven't introduced it yet. They've announced it, but haven't introduced it. But then in every province and territory, there needs to be a change to the Employment Standards Act to have the time off work to access this new federal benefit. In Ontario, we lobbied for that change and it passed back in December. And in fact, they called it Scottie's Law after my daughter.
Oh, nice.
Which is really, really exciting to have that named after her. And so when it rolls out, we're not only able to access the benefit, but no one will get dismissed from work for accessing the benefit. They'll have that job protection in place for those extra 15 weeks.
That's amazing. That's great. Along those lines, and I think you might have answered the question, but there might be more to it. But let's say I create a new election and Zane becomes Premier of Ontario or Prime Minister of Canada. If you're able, what other changes would you make? How would you make the landscape for fertility and surrogacy better at the federal and provincial point of view, aside of the obvious of like more money? But what other changes do you think need to happen?
I haven't really thought about it because those are really big questions. I'm kind of just focusing on building a family on my own.
You mean you're not planning to be Prime Minister tomorrow? No?
Not tomorrow, not ever, but definitely not tomorrow. So for me, I still struggle with the eligibility criteria in Ontario. The funding, as you both know, is tracked through the person getting pregnant. And so that means that my wife, Baden, wasn't even able to access her own funded IVF cycle because we knew on the outset that we needed a surrogate to build our family. And so we didn't want to lie to the doctor and say we want to create embryos only to change our mind and say, oh, no, never mind, we can't. We're going to have to use a surrogate. And so that means it's a bit of a catch-22 because we have to then find the surrogate before creating the embryos. And most women who want to be surrogates want to have everything lined up, ready to go, so that they can hit the ground running to start with screening and legal and transfers and not have to wait around for the intended parents to do IVF. So if I could wave my magic wand and I could be premier, I would say the funding tracked through the people desiring the family as opposed to the people getting pregnant. In the case of heterosexual families that are just using IVF to build their family, it would make no change because they are the same people that we're going to have the baby at the end. But in case of gay couples, in case of folks using gestational surrogacy, the case of women with MRKH, for example, that don't have a uterus, they're not able to access that funded cycle, even if it is their eggs. And so it's the program working for the majority as opposed to for the margins. And I've always said they should design policies for the margins, because if it's designed for folks on the outskirts, then it'll always work for the people on the inside, but not necessarily the other way around. For federally, I do think that there should be more regulations in place for agencies in Canada. I'm one of the few actually that love the altruistic system of surrogacy in Canada. I think that,
Can you explain that a little bit? You might not understand kind of the nuances of that or sort of how Canada and US are different.
yeah. So in Canada, you actually can't pay a surrogate to be a surrogate. You can reimburse their expenses, so they shouldn't be out of pocket a dime, but you can't pay them a compensation or any sort of wage. And that's punishable by up to 10 years in prison or $500,000 fine, or some cases both. And likewise, where I was talking about with the agencies before, you can't pay someone to matchmake you or can't pay someone to arrange or facilitate that sort of thing. And so that means that surrogates are coming to this for altruistic reasons. They're coming to this just because they want to help people build families, and there's no money or compensation in it for them. I think that there's a lot of ethical challenges with that. And of course, likewise with surrogacy, it means there's 100 intended parents for every one surrogate because there's so few surrogates in Canada. When in the States, if you're able to make a little bit of money doing it, you could do it as a side hustle and it makes it more accessible for people. But I think that it helps put people's heads in the right spaces, that they're wanting to do this purely for the purpose of building families with no financial benefit to them. I think that there's a bit of an ethical argument that if someone is making a wage, then it should be taxable income. And I don't know how I feel about having women's bodies be taxed for being pregnant. And if they're getting compensated for being pregnant for the purposes of surrogacy, then why wouldn't they be compensated for being pregnant for the purposes of not surrogacy? And then you have the government, of course, paying women to become pregnant. And so there's just a slippery slope of
Yes.
what happens.
Right.
There's an argument about if there is a compensation model, will it drive away Canadian intended parents? Because we're going to be having folks from other countries where they can afford commercial surrogacy. And if there's no cap on these sorts of things, then it's actually going to harm intended parents like me because we're going to be priced out. I think it's a slippery slope, and it makes me very worried about any significant changes to that. So if I was prime minister, I wouldn't be so quick to make those changes. And I do think that there's other ways to improve accessibility in this space beyond deregulating it in that sense.
That's really interesting that you have that perspective. To be honest, I was surprised. I thought you were going to say the opposite. I agree with you, but from the perspective of somebody who needs a surrogate like you do, it does make the pool a lot smaller when there's no compensation. So I thought that was going to be your perspective, but no, I agree with you. It's a slippery slope and it can lead to problems. I didn't think about that argument that you made about people coming in and then pricing out Canadians, so making access even more difficult. And I mean, that has happened with the housing market. So we know it's very well possible. That's a very interesting perspective. So other than doing that, how will you improve access, Mr. Prime Minister?
By the way, you can use this as your start of your ad campaign for your political campaign. We will gladly allow you to do that. Just saying.
No, I'm good, thank you. I think that anyone who wants to build a family should be able to do so. And I'm so glad that surrogacy exists in Canada, is legal. It's in so many countries in Europe. It's not legal at all. It's safe. It's ethical. There's so many legal protections in place. I worry about countries like Ukraine and Georgia and Mexico, where women are becoming surrogates and there's a third party managing the whole thing. And there's just a weird human trafficking element that makes me really uncomfortable. And so I love having that personal relationship with our surrogate, that we get to send pictures. She gets to watch Scottie grow up. It's so special to me to have that happen. It's a really political answer, and it's the best one you're going to get.
It was excellent.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I really think you should run.
You see, you've already got 2 votes.
There we go.
Not to mention all of our listeners.
So to change gears a little bit, you've gone through one surrogacy journey, you're mentioned talking about your second one. When you told the story, it sounds like everything went according to plan. Everything kind of moved along in a very calculated way, let's say, or things went the way that they were supposed to. But looking back, is there anything that you're going to do differently the next time, or anything that you wish you had sort of known about earlier?
Going into the second journey, I think we already know what the prize is. We know what it's like to be parents. And so we don't have this pit in our stomach that will this ever happen for us? It's just a matter of when, not if. And so that takes a little bit of the burden off in trying to complete your family as opposed to build your family. And there's a lot of hurry up and wait in fertility and with surrogacy as well. But my wife would remind me that you're planning for a cycle, the importance of taking a couple of months to take your prenatals in advance, it really does impact egg quality. And we've seen that with just her most recent cycle as well. So don't rush into everything just because you got the right opportunity, but taking some of those vitamins are really important. And so we have a bit more of a runway to be able to plan and prepare our bodies for that sort of thing. And building the relationship with a surrogate is really, really special. Try to find the right person and take your time. Don't just find the first available person who wants to put their hand up, because it really is about fit. And you are going to be tied to this person for the rest of your life, whether you like it or not. It's like finding a spouse. And then I would say to the dads who are listening, prioritize parental leave. I took 9 months with my daughter. My wife and I split the 18-month leave between the two of us. And I took a fair amount of time, from 9 months to 18 months of her life, and time you never get back, as they say. And it was really, really special for me to be able to take it.
That's wonderful.
Speaking of that, as being the male partner, as your partner is going through IVF and fertility treatments, I mean, this is something that we've talked about on previous episodes. From your perspective, sometimes the male in a heterosexual couple may feel like they're a little bit on the sidelines, or they're not kind of as important. How did you try to be an active participant, or how do you feel that you should support your female partner as they're going through? So what's your take on that?
I did my best to show up. Like, I was there at every appointment. I recognized that it certainly wasn't male factor and it wasn't female factor in a traditional way, because there's obviously no egg quality issues there. It was just a matter of needing someone else to help us complete or build our family. And so just remembering that you're not just a sperm donor, you are an active participant in this journey, and you need to be informed on treatment. You need to be informed on consent, and your DNA is being stored at a clinic and being mixed with someone. And so it's very serious, very grown-up conversations to have, especially when we're talking about PGTA testing, PGTM testing, viability of embryos. Like, there's a lot of ethical questions. And first of all, I think it's fascinating. And second of all, I think that it's just not something you want to just burden your partner with and check out of. These are babies that you're trying to make yourself, and you should be an active participant in those conversations too.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we hear the partner say, oh, you decide whatever you want. And I think sometimes that comes from a good place, because I know women have the burden of having to go through the treatment. And I think that sometimes men just realize, this is not my body, it's her body, and it would be what it would be. But as a female partner, I can tell you, having been through it, that, like you said, it's half your genetic material, and these are big decisions. And the last thing that we want as women going through this is to have the burden of those decisions. Even for me, as a fertility specialist, my husband is not a fertility specialist, and I am. And going through the journey, he kind of checked out in a way, because he's like, well, you know everything and I know nothing. So it's like, you don't need me to help you make decisions, because this is literally your job. But it was still like, no, I need to talk about it. Yeah, I know the medicine, but it's still your material, right? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
So I get that completely. I agree.
You're right. I think it absolutely comes from a good place. The recognition that it is the woman's body, and she's the one carrying the
physical,
heavier
Mhm.
load, so to speak. But I think that saying, oh, whatever you want, dear, just sort of, you're offloading what you could be carrying back on her.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think that's really difficult, and it's tough, because you're right. It's not just about the medicine. It's not facts. It's about your feelings, your beliefs, your thoughts. And
Mhm.
then, God forbid, the worst later on, when, something happens and
Mhm.
then the partner didn't understand what was happening or why
Mhm,
something
mhm,
happened. And now we have to kind of go backtrack and explain,
mhm.
right? That's always the hardest.
My wife and I have instead of push presents, we do plunge presents. So every time if she gets a needle plunge in her, she gets a present.
That's a lot.
Not every needle, but every
I was
cycle.
gonna say that's
A lot of it's a lot of presents. By the way, I think that there is like a whole cohort of women who are going to forwarding this cord at least
I
for
guess
sure
so.
to their partner.
this is gonna be the clip we're gonna put on social media.
Absolutely.
We'll have a protest from all the male partners outside the clinic, like, stop
That's
it.
right. I'm losing votes here, as you said.
But you know what? I think you make a really good point. The quote unquote push present is intended to celebrate the achievements and you did this crazy big thing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the pushing,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
That there's still so many other steps that still have to happen that are just as important and that are just as valuable when it comes to a lot of things, not just in terms of building a family, but in terms of building a relationship and as a couple moving forward into the family that you want. So why not a plunge present? I love it.
Yeah. What we're dealing with right now is putting a toddler to bed, and we celebrate like jumping around the room every time one of us comes out of her room and puts her to sleep. And we say, like, really over rotate on the validation, like, amazing job. Can't believe you did that. Good for you. Way to go. People should over rotate on the little things, because the person who's in the room who's trying to rub a back for 45 minutes, try to get a baby to sleep, is feeling like this is never going to end. And same with someone who's going through IVF treatment. So when they're finished a retrieval and they're resting at home, it wasn't a little thing. It was a significant effort, and it should be celebrated.
Absolutely.
Yeah, been there, done that, 100%.
So if there are people out there listening who are interested in participating or getting involved with Conceivable Dreams,
Yeah.
how can people do that?
Our website is conceivabledreams.org or at Conceived Dreams on Instagram and Twitter. By all means, send us a note. There's an opportunity to register for our communications. We don't have outward communications or a newsletter as much as we'd like. We kind of work behind the scenes, but feel free to reach out to connect with me directly. Always happy to build more relationships in this space, and just keep an eye on what we're up to and let us know if you have any ideas or if you want to get more involved.
Thank you so much, Zane, for sharing your story, for sharing your perspective, for your advocacy, and for running for Prime Minister to fix all the problems.
And of course, best of luck to both you and your partner
Thank you.
as you are embarking on this second surrogacy journey. And hopefully, in not too long of a while, we're going to be hearing about Scottie's little sibling.
I hope so. Thank you very much for having me, guys. This was great.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast, or visit us online at markandfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss.
Music from Mixkit, Life is a Dream by Michael Ramirez C.
My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.